How could Ron sleep with such beautiful snow drifting by outside his window? Besides, it was Christmas Eve after all. Of course he was tired. The day had been busy. Started by cleaning the house in anticipation of his mother's family and their imminent arrival upon the following morning, followed by a last-minute trip to Kroger with his teenage sister, because his dad had, of course, forgotten to grab the marshmallows for the sweet potatoes. Then it was racing every which way from Walmart to church and then, finally, Ron's grandparents' house to celebrate with his father's side of the family. They'd gotten back well past 10, much later than Ron was normally allowed to be awake. They'd been looking at Christmas lights on their way home. And so, of course, he was tired. But no child sleeps on Christmas Eve, especially not one who's waiting for Santa Claus. The hours passed away, night turning into early morning, but his rooftop was still quiet and bare. Thoughts of presents burned in his head, as a giddiness warmed and sparkled in his heart like firecrackers. He'd been so good all year long. Surely the base of the tree would be filled, packed full of gifts and goodies. So many colors, so many sizes of bows and ribbons, for him and his sister, for his mom and his dad. But there was a change in the winds that Ron could feel while tucked in his bed. He sat up with a fright as the night started to howl and turn. The snow outside whipped past his window, scattering as it fell. As the house seemed to tremble, there was a clattering upon the roof. It was an unmistakable sound, on this night most of all. The clacking of a great many reindeer hooves. Ron couldn't believe it. First there was joy, overwhelming joy. Santa had come. He was here. He'd come to bring his presents as he slept. But he wasn't asleep. Didn't he need to be asleep? He thought so. Startled and embarrassed, he instantly fell straight back to bed, pulling the covers tight overhead. Would Santa know he wasn't asleep? Ron figured as much. So he pulled the sheets tight over his face, listening in the darkness as Santa dismounted his sleigh. Clack, clack, clack. Those weren't the sounds that Ron had imagined boots to make. They were footsteps, surely, as the house moaned beneath a shifting weight. But with each step, there was an awful scraping, a horrid clack, clack, clack. They were angry footsteps. At least, that's what Ron thought. Why would Santa be mad? Why else, he pondered, I'm still not asleep. So he closed his eyes and lay so perfectly still. Maybe, just maybe, Santa wouldn't be mad. And there he listened, as the awful, clacking sounds moved from the ceiling and down their wall. Not down the wall, down the chimney, Ron realized. It spread into the house, and Ron started to shiver. The December night seemed to creep into his room, even though the window held tight. Letting the covers fall over him completely, he shrunk inwards, clutching his knees close to his chest, his hands rubbing and warming his feet. There was a jingling sound, along with the clack-clacks, that came from downstairs. Santa was at the tree, surely. He was dropping presents and candy. He was filling the stockings nailed to the mantel above the holly with all kinds of goodies and more. There was, for a moment, a clattering, sharp and unwelcome, but Ron just shrugged it off. Santa must have dropped the plate of warm chocolate chip cookies. Then, Ron started to wonder. The clacks were moving through the house, away from the living room and away from the tree. Where was Santa moving, and in such a slow, sluggish way? The awful footsteps meandered through the house, through every room and hall, until they came to the bottom of the stairs. Santa was coming up the stairs, but for the first time, Ron really wasn't sure. Why would Santa be coming upstairs? He'd often dreamed of meeting Mr. Claus, but he had a terrible feeling. He didn't want to meet Santa. Not tonight, and not just because he'd been naughty and stayed awake. The closer the footsteps got, the more his teeth chattered. Christmas Eve had always been like a wondrous dream before. Tonight, somehow, it felt more like a nightmare. At the top of the stairs, Santa turned down the hall, towards Ron's parents' room. The door there creaked open. But why? Why would Santa need to see his parents? What was he doing? The footsteps stopped for a while, and Ron listened closely. He wondered if he'd woken them. If Santa and his parents were talking, perhaps talking about him. But soon the scratching footsteps started again, moving towards Ron, moving down the hall. He listened as Santa stopped outside his sister's room, just a room down the hall. He was close, and the more he heard the clacking clacks, the more Ron imagined a big, mangy raven or crow than a big man in red. Ron had grown nervous. Santa was in his sister's room for a very long time. Then, at last, it was his turn indeed, as Santa crept down the hall and pried open Ron's door. With a hiss, he entered. The only warmth Ron could feel surprised him. He hadn't expected the tears that moistened his cheeks. The footsteps, clack, 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 stopped right beside his bed, and the sounds were replaced with a labored, heavy breathing. Ron didn't know what to expect, for he no longer believed that this was Santa Claus. Whatever stood before him didn't feel warm and cheery. Whatever stood before him made the air tremble and shake. How could it not be Santa? Ron wondered. Only Santa can drive in Santa's sleigh. It must be him. It must. Mustn't it? He couldn't see the thing that should have been Santa, but he imagined it standing, leaning over him, scowling and sneering. He could feel it, an anger unimaginable. He wanted to cry. But the thing, Santa, left without a word, without an assault of any kind. It clacked down the stairs, through the living room where it momentarily paused, and then it hastened its escape, fleeing up the chimney and out onto the roof. Hooves above stomped and clattered, almost in protest, as the thing that should have been Santa mounted the sleigh. Ron, feeling warm once more, threw off the covers and got up at once. The thing. What could it have been? Not Santa. Surely not. But it had left something under the tree. He knew that for sure. And so, without waking his parents, as fast as he could, Ron moved down the dark hall and down the stairs towards the living room and their great, luminous Christmas tree. The lights were on, but not the ones they'd placed. The charcoal tree glimmered with tiny red dots, blistering like embers, but that wasn't all. In the fireplace, a real fire still burned. No, raged. Uncontrolled, its large tongues licked about the carpet and dangling holly, scorching them black. But more. The stockings were gone. Stolen. Replaced. Ron's face contorted with pain and horror. Nailed to the mantel, 3 familiar faces, stolen from their rooms in the middle of the night. Their screams were silent. Ron's was anything but. Satisfied, the thing that stole Santa's sleigh smiled and mushed the unwilling reindeer on. There were still so many houses left to visit that night. Thanks for taking the time to drop by and watch this video. You know what would make me a happy doctor? Hitting that like button, leaving a comment, and subscribing to my channel. Go on, I've got plenty more stories to tell you.